Hopefully, the internet's happen. Awesome. I see microphones moving. How are you doing, Alon?
I'm doing great. How are you, John?
I'm doing great myself. I see audio dials moving. If someone in the chat can let us know if they can hear us okay, we will charge on ahead. So happy to have you on. You're going to be talking to us about Blazor mobile bindings, huh?
Yeah, actually, I forgot to mention you. I don't want to embarrass you too much, but it's mobile Blazor bindings.
Mobile Blazor bindings.
All
That's
the right.
it. Now we got to cancel and reschedule the show.
Yeah, sorry everybody. Yeah,
And I should also say experimental
experimental mobile
mobile
Blazor.
Blazor
Just
binding.
open a dictionary, flip through the pages,
I,
pick
I
one
think you need
word
a
from the
code
page.
name like Raptor Phoenix Pro 2000,
Whoa, is
something
that
like
name taken? Can we
I
use that?
I don't know if it is.
Raptor Phoenix.
Yeah,
Wow,
and
I like it.
because like people go with stuff like unicorns, but those are cute. I think you want something a little tougher, a little like hard
Yeah, I mean
hitting.
this thing might just rip your head off
Yeah,
and eat you for breakfast. That's how dangerous. A unicorn would never do that.
no, unicorns are like, I mean, they've got the one horn, but that's it. They miss you with the horn, and you.
Yeah, that's the window you need, and then you take them out.
Yep.
But I don't,
So
well,
I
I'll think about it.
Yeah, and I will give you an opportunity to think about it while I show off the community links. Let us do some things where I switch to my desktop. Awesome. Here are the links for the week. Somebody pointed out to me, and I don't actually use this, but there is a QR code feature. And, I don't know how likely it is that anyone actually wants to use this QR code, but if they wanted to, they could. And this would give them access to this list of links. I will also just share it in the chat, but this is what I got for you this week. Every week I'm like, oh, I'll just do a few links and then go looking at what everyone's writing about. And there's a lot of good stuff. So I've grouped these in terms of kind of subject matters. So first we've got some things dealing with identity and authentication. So Joseph, with a pretty hefty walkthrough of using the Microsoft Identity Platform. So as it points out here, this is a 10-minute read. This is in-depth, and it's just a full-on walkthrough. So step-by-step of what you need to do. There's not anything really specific I want to call out in here other than it's a great resource, and it's cool to see. Joseph said he's been creating some more stuff lately. He's doing some live Twitch streams, and he's doing some in-depth walkthroughs and stuff. So excellent. Looking forward to seeing more. All right, Christos has been he is working with like the Microsoft Graph team and doing authentication stuff lately. And so here is another. This is using Azure EasyAuth, so Azure App Service Authentication and integration with .NET Core 3.1. Again, this is a pretty hefty walkthrough. Just walking through everything you need to do as far as getting it set up. So EasyAuth is really cool. Like it's neat that you can integrate it very easily, but it's also nice that you can do some more advanced integration. So good stuff. And finally, this is just neat. Identity server, built into like the API templates. There's the single page app templates, and so it's they've updated their demo.identityserver.io to Identity Server 4. So what's cool here, this allows you to go through, like it gives you links over to source code, but also as you're doing local development, this is pretty cool that you can work directly against their demo server here. All right, now for some traditional server-side rendered HTML section of our stuff. So here's just a quick walkthrough from Mike, and he's showing how to integrate the Blazor carousel with Razor Pages and the Entity Framework. So he's pulling information from Entity Framework and using it to select items that appear in the carousel. And it's just I think I really like the components that are available with Bootstrap, and it's neat to be able to integrate them. Here, this is pretty straightforward, just pulling items out of the list. Here, he's pulling out employees, And then you can put in things like an employee picture, right? Or data. So here he's finding in the employee photo, and he's actually using base 64 data for that. All right, this is neat. So Jonathan is writing up using a chart component, and there's a lot of JavaScript chart libraries out there. What's nice with this is he's integrating it a little bit more, and he's using a view component. So that's kind of cool there, how that's integrated. So here he's using chart.js. He's creating a view component for that. And so here's his chart component, and like doing the integration stuff with chart.js. And then he goes through and has a pretty chart. So I like this, that you can integrate things more directly, and using something like a view component to componentize it. So stuff. All right, Shahed charging ahead. Here he's almost done with his 26-part series on ASP.NET Core 3.1. And here he's looking at XML and JSON output for web APIs. So there's the kind of obvious, the things that you can do kind of right out of the box, in-depth things that you can do as far as customizing. Definitely with JSON, there's a lot you can do. And so he walks through doing that. And again, I don't have a specific thing I want to pull out in here other than, good on you, Shahed, for writing these in-depth things. I regularly, like when I'm looking up something that I want to do, I'll check these out because these are just a step beyond what's in the docs. And what's neat about this series too is that he's doing this with his NetLearner code base. So he has taken this NetLearner project, and then all of his different themes, he uses those to kind of dig deeper into that. All right, moving into some Blazor fun. So first of all, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but Jeff Fritz has this really cool project where he's kind of implemented web forms controls in Blazor. So for projects that are migrating from web forms, moving over to Blazor and wanting to get, run a modern solution, take advantage of all the newest stuff, then, this is kind of a nice component-to-component translation. So first of all, here he's interviewed on Technology and Friends, which is also super cool. So great that I don't even know how many episodes David's done of this. It's hundreds and hundreds. But so here's an interview about that. And then here's Jeff Fritz's repo. So he goes through and shows all these different components, right? And so he's just re-implemented these in Blazor, and it's a community project. So he's getting a lot of, pull requests and issues, and he does these on his live stream as well. All right, speaking of Blazor, we got Jeremy Lickness, and he did a 3-part series on like building a line of business application. And what was cool with this is he got some feedback from people on ways it could improve. And so a few things in here he did. One is simple UI focus thing where working better with responsiveness. And it's cool that Blazor has all these features. That's a kind of a major overlooked advantage of building things with Bootstrap is it's a lot, it's built for responsive, like working well from a phone all the way up to a very large, high DPI display. And so he goes through and sets that up. So that's cool. But a more in-depth thing is he got some feedback on his Blazor implementation. And he was using like a state has changed. And he was constantly calling state has changed to bubble up things and to, as something happened in one component, to refresh the display. And he was told that he was really kind of working against the model in Blazor and that he should be using cascading values and parameters better. And, honestly, I'm still kind of wrapping my head around this. I'm sure, Eilon, you could point out stuff, but it's working with the component model as opposed to kind of trying to force it to do stuff, is really important. And so here he's showing using things like cascading values and parameters. And as he's setting things, then so they kind of bubble down and flow up as things change. So yeah, just kind of a walkthrough of doing that. And then So, and talking about why, like every time you call state has changed, you're blowing away the component tree and requiring it to rebuild. And so this whole kind of, as you, if you're able to work with it better, then you're going to be a lot more efficient as well. All right, one more silly thing here. This is, hopefully I won't blow anyone's ears out, but this is pretty cool. So Vaktanji sent me this, and this is a piano. And here we can hopefully not blow anyone's ears out, but it's pretty neat how he's doing that. So this is he actually set it up so you can play it using the keyboard as well. And he's got a ton of these out there. And here this is the code for how he's doing that. This brings back good old memories. I don't know about you, Eilon, but I got my start like programming with an Apple II, and I was using the basic beep commands and stuff like that. And it's just kind of funny to see this.
I did do that. It was MS-DOS for me, but same, the PC speaker. Absolutely.
Cool. So anyhow, and these are all, he's got tons of demos and tons of stuff in here, all kinds of stuff. He also does some neat stuff with SVG. That is all the links I brought to the table. And then Eilon, you brought a few. This is one that I actually did share when it came out. But this is the announcement post from the last release, the experimental mobile Blazor bindings. So this is cool, and I was happy to see some of the things, especially like the CSS improvements. That's pretty neat to me. Mm-hmm. And then two things that you pointed out in here, which is very cool, especially because we're in the community blog post section, is one, Dylan has this thing about getting started and why you should care. So this is pretty cool. Anything you want to call out specifically here, or just that it's a cool post?
I think anybody who's interested in mobile Blazor binding should check out these posts. Dylan's post is a great, as you said, it's all about why you should care about this. And well, I intrinsically care about it because it's a project I work on, and I think some of the things I show today are going to be a great kind of continuation of even more why you should care. Cool. And then the other few blog posts there were from Chris Sainty, who wrote a really cool series that dives into a lot of depth about how to do more advanced scenarios as well with mobile Blazor bindings.
It's interesting. I'm seeing in Dylan's, he points out just the simplicity in terms of lines of code. So some things here, like this is, using Xamarin Forms, and there's no, I see people get very uptight about different things. A lot of things, it's just like, hey, which works better for you? There's no like right or wrong for a lot of stuff. For some people, they may just prefer the XAML MVVM style, and that's cool. For other people, myself, I'm more naturally, like I have more of a, I've been doing more Blazor dev lately, and this syntax feels kind of more natural to me.
Yeah, likewise.
Cool. All right. Well, that's it for our community links. I will share them in the chat. But yeah, good stuff. I guess I can switch to you. Do you want to start showing us some neat things?
I'll show some things.
Or do you want to talk first?
I'll let the viewers decide whether they're neat. Let's see if I can share the correct screen here. Hey, there's my face.
Excellent. Okay. And there we go. It's looking good.
Okay, right on. Okay, well, first of all, John, thank you for having me again. Apologies for our little confusion. You asked me if I could do it. I never said yes until
yesterday.
Until
I was like,
night.
Oh shoot, I got so it was a little bit last minute for you, but yeah, happy it's happening.
Things have been a bit busy. That's my excuse. But anyway, so just I want to do like the 1 or 2 minute kind of recap on what is mobile Blazor bindings, because what I'm going to show today is a continuation of what's coming up in mobile Blazor bindings. So experimental mobile Blazor bindings is some NuGet packages and project templates that let you use Razor syntax, the same Razor syntax that you use in Blazor, to build native mobile applications for iOS and Android, and in fact, anywhere you can use Xamarin Forms, because it's built on top of the Xamarin platform. What it does is it lets you use the Blazor syntax as a replacement for the XAML syntax, but using the same components, the same functionality. You have access to things like Xamarin Essentials for using native device capabilities and sensors and maps and everything that the camera, everything that the device has to offer. The idea being is that we know there's a whole bunch of people who have a lot of web development skills. They know how to use Razor and Blazor, and then you mentioned CSS, which I'll talk about more today. And they really want to build native mobile applications. And a lot of tech for native mobile apps is just completely different from web tech. And we thought this would be a great way to let people dip their toes in, get more comfortable building native mobile apps with some of the technologies they're already familiar with. So that's a little bit of kind of what mobile Blazor bindings is. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I think folks may have already seen that, or you can watch some of the past. There's lots of talks and demos out there that you can check out. One of the things John mentioned is that in the most recent update, which is just nearly 1 month ago that we did for mobile Blazor bindings, is improvements to CSS. One of the big selling points, I think, for mobile Blazor bindings is its support for real, actual CSS. It's not some kind of fake CSS-like thing, but you can apply CSS styles to elements in mobile Blazor bindings, just like you can in other Xamarin Forms projects, and potentially even share CSS styles between parts of your web app, parts of your mobile app. So I wrote up some docs.
Are you?
Yes, John.
How does this even happen? Like, if you're already going to go into this later, that's good. Tell me to shut up. But I'm thinking of these are mobile components, and they're CSS. And how can my brain make this work?
Yeah, it's the answer I'd love to give, which I think is completely true, is there's a bunch of really super smart people who work on Xamarin and Xamarin Forms, and that's where that comes from. How does it actually work? The short story is your CSS file gets embedded as an embedded resource in the DLL that gets compiled. And when you instantiate Xamarin Forms elements, which is ultimately what mobile Blazor bindings does, is it, instead of creating them from XAML, it creates them from the Blazor syntax, and it creates stack layouts and buttons and spinners and maps and checkboxes and all these things. And then Xamarin Forms matches those up with the contents of your CSS file, just like a web browser would do, and applies them as necessary. And they actually very recently did some really cool bug fixes to CSS because it didn't work really well when you had dynamically changing elements. So as you add and remove elements from the page dynamically, which in XAML is not as common, but in Blazor is the name of the game. Mm-hmm. And so there were some issues, some compatibility issues there, and the Xamarin Forms team they quickly fixed the issue, and that's out there, and that makes for a really clean, cool story. And so there's some docs here on how to do it, and there's one of the samples in the mobile Blazor bindings repo, Xamarin/mobile Blazor bindings on GitHub, is the weather sample. And the weather sample, if I go into the UI part of the project here, oops. What am I clicking on? Did GitHub always have that ... to go up to the parent directory?
That seems new to me. Which, by the way, in GitHub, have you switched over to the new view?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Yeah, I like it. It's subtly different and it's cleaner.
Yeah.
So maybe that's new. But anyway, that's cool. Reminds me of navigating in File Manager or Norton Commander.
There you go. Yeah.
Midnight Commander, which I found out not too long ago. My boss wrote Midnight Commander.
Yep.
Yeah. So I didn't know that. When you find out all the things that Miguel worked on, it's like, wait,
ridiculous. Yeah.
What? Anyway, so here there's a CSS file here. It's a real regular CSS file. The editing experience in Visual Studio is terrific with autocomplete, and you get IntelliSense, and you get the little color pickers and things like that. So this is a regular CSS file. And then here in the main, where is it? Weather app.razor. To consume it, you embed you associate the CSS file in the style sheet component, and then you use CSS just like you would in HTML. So you set, class equals CSS class selector, or also you can use, there are other types of selectors as well, element selectors and hierarchical selectors to say, all the buttons inside a stack layout, I want to have this style. And so forth. All the regular CSS things that you expect. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's the same exact CSS that your parents and your parents' parents used way back in their day.
So, question
Yes.
from the chat. Somebody asked, is there support for things like less or, like other CSS sort of extensions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think somebody asked that, maybe it's the same person, somebody asked that on the mobile Blazor bindings repo. There's no automatic support for it at this time, but as long as your build system, if you wire up the right MS build things to hook up less or SAS or whatever CSS minification or processing you want, and hook it into a standard CS proj MS build file, it should absolutely just work. So you edit your SAS or less or whatever files, it'll process as long as it produces the CSS file in the end, and that generated CSS file gets embedded as a resource with whatever file name or folder name. So as long as you produce ultimately something called weatherstyles.css or whatever you want, absolutely should work, because eventually it just gets embedded as a resource in the assembly. So how it gets there, totally up to you and what you want to use. So kind of if you can get it to work in an ASP.NET Core project, let's say, which would be a kind of the most natural place to use something like that. I haven't tried it, but I cannot think of any reason why it wouldn't work, because it's just MS Build at that point, and MS Build certainly has the power to do that.
Okay. Yeah,
so
I'm remembering too, there's extensions in Visual Studio for like compile less or SAS to CSS on save and stuff too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's some templates, some item templates for it as well. Yeah.
One last question is, like CSS, there's a huge amount of like new features and things coming out all the time and stuff. I use like websites like Can I Use and stuff to see what's supported. Is this kind of what kind of like, is there support for grid and like other? I see there's supported CSS styles.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Somewhere here, so in the documentation on mobile Blazor bindings, there's a link, ultimately because it's based on Xamarin Forms, elements and processing. There's a terrific doc here, which I have read extensively. Of course, I've forgotten it all, but there's a terrific set of documentation here on the Xamarin Forms section of the docs website that goes into also their custom extensions, because Xamarin Forms elements, there are some things that HTML supports that Xamarin Forms doesn't have, but there are also some things that Xamarin Forms has that HTML doesn't have. So everything you see in this document on the official Xamarin Forms CSS section should work as described here for Xamarin Forms, but it'll also work in mobile Blazor bindings. And so there's some pretty advanced
of that. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, we did get one more question in the chat. Is CSS isolation supported?
So I think what that is, I think it's something that I think I've heard, I think maybe React supports, where you can apply CSS to just a portion of your application. And that way
like a component
exactly. As far as I know, there is not currently support for that. If that's something where there's good demand for that, and I could see why there might be, then that's certainly something we could look at. I don't think there's currently support for isolation of CSS, which that certainly would be nice, but that's one of those things where if people want it and it bubbles up to the top, then that's often how features get done sooner rather than later, or if at all.
And I can see that being a nice to have, but I also it's not hard to set a class or an ID on a component and use the CSS to specify that too, right?
Yeah, I would think it might, I would imagine, come into play for, let's say, a large app or an app that uses third-party components, perhaps. So
that makes sense.
Naming conflicts, which, I think there are ways around it. It's easier when you control 100% of the application, but if you don't control 100% of the application, then kind of being able to isolate it obviously is an advantage.
Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if you could kind of hack it around. Maybe.
Cool. All right.
Sure.
Well, I'll stop distracting you with questions. I love CSS, and I think it's really interesting, so I could nerd out about it all day.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So that kind of leads me. So that this is stuff that you can use today. This is all out in Preview 3. And so what's coming next? There's two big things that I've started working on in collaboration with Steve Sanderson, who is the inventor of Blazor and who currently still works on Blazor, and also working with the Xamarin teams. And the first thing that I'll just talk about, because I don't have anything to show just yet, but just to kind of set expectations, because people have asked for it or asked about it, is integration with .NET Maui. .NET Maui, I think James is, I think, in the chat. He'll probably freak out like, no, that's not how we talk about it. Sorry, James.
He doesn't talk quite like that.
Yeah, not quite. He'll probably talk about like cool monkeys or something.
Right.
He knows all about monkeys, which is awesome. Anyway, .NET Maui is the .NET multi-platform application user interface. I think that's what it stands for. .NET multi-platform. It probably stands for something like that. Anyway, so it's kind of you can think of it as a successor to Xamarin Forms, so for building cross-platform UI, and that's planned for .NET 6, which is scheduled for next year. So that's, a year away is both very far and it's very near. I think for customers, it's like, oh, we have to wait a year. And then for people working on it, it's like, oh my gosh, we only have a year. So there's that. And so we want to work on using experimental mobile Blazor bindings. Well, if .NET Maui is also for building mobile applications, then we want experimental mobile Blazor bindings to have a story for .NET Maui as well. So that's something we've experimented with. Don't have anything to show just yet, but rest assured, once we have something to show, we'll share it as soon as possible here on the community stand-up, and everybody who wants to know about it will know about it. So that's one, because again, Blazor is a tech that's appropriate for just about any kind of UI, and we want to make sure that it's represented appropriately with .NET Maui. And then the thing that I'll spend the rest of my time on is talking about Blazor hybrid applications. So what we saw so far, let me close that. It's got Visual Studio here. This we have not, we're going to make this public very soon. We have to fine tune a few ones and zeros in the code, and we'll get this out. But hybrid application is one where you have a mixture of true native UI, like you might have with Xamarin Forms or .NET Maui or WPF or lots of different systems. And parts of your application are hosted inside some kind of web view, like Chromium or WebKit, that contains HTML-based UI. Now, we know you can use Blazor to build HTML web apps or progressive web apps. We know you can use Blazor to build native web apps with mobile Blazor bindings, but what if you did both of them inside the same application? So I think Steve has probably shown this a little bit before, or Dan Roth, other folks on the Blazor team have shown this. So I'll show it for folks who might not have seen it. Let's see, where do I want to start? Let's just run the application. So it's kind of like a default template experience running. I've got my Mac sitting next to me, so I've got the iOS. This is so cool that you can do this. I can run and debug my iOS application on Windows with Visual Studio for Windows, but it's just running on the Mac that's sitting 6 inches away.
Yeah.
So this top portion of the application here, where it says Hello World 0, is a native UI built using mobile Blazor bindings. So if we take a look at what that is, we see here main.razor. Let me zoom that in a little bit. Here, that's a little bit better. Let's see if I can fit this all on the screen. So we have here Hello World and a counter, and when I click increment counter, it does the thing that you expect. It increments a counter. I think everybody's seen this in literally every Blazor demo ever since the first day of Blazor. Hello World and a number. But what's this here at the bottom? Well, I'll give a hint. It's web UI. This is HTML. In fact, it even says it's my hybrid app. And here in the UI definition, you see there's a Blazor web view that's pointing at a www root folder, and it's loading this other Blazor component. So what does that look like? Let's start navigating to this counter. Now we have another counter. In fact, you got double counter action here. And as I increment this native one, we see that the web-based one here at the bottom is sharing the same UI. In fact, it doesn't matter which increment button I click on, they're both affecting the same state, because in this case, we're getting our state from dependency injection. We have this counter state object that is shared as a .NET object between the Blazor code that's operating for the native UI up top and sharing down to the web-based Blazor down at the bottom, which is all just running .NET code. This is not, there's nothing else going on here. So what does that web portion of the app look like for the bottom? Well, if you kind of squint your eyes a little bit, this looks exactly like a web-based Blazor application. It's got a www root folder with some static files, and hey, look, John, your favorite folder, the CSS folder. Yes. And this is using exactly the same type of CSS that you would use in a web app, because it's a little web browser window, essentially. So you can use things like Bootstrap inside there, and that's why this UI looks like Bootstrap UI. And so these are just static files. I've got some custom CSS here, got a JSON file. I don't think you really need a fave icon, but it's there. And then here you have some Razor files. And this is now HTML. So this bottom portion here, so this menu here and everything below it is all written using HTML. So this is a real HTML, because this is a web view. I see in the chat there's some questions here. Is this like a WK web view? Yeah, so this is, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but on every platform that this runs on, and it runs on a lot of different platforms, it's using that platform's native system. So on WPF, it's using Edge's, the Edge, Edgium WebView 2. On Android, it's using Android's WebView. On Mac and iOS, it's using their native systems as well. Okay. But I can talk a little bit more about that. And let me know if I'm missing any important questions, because I'm glancing on like 5 different screens. Yeah, I'll
try and bring them up. I was trying to give you a chance to get through some stuff before I do too many more questions.
Sure. So this is it's kind of a bizarre thing to wrap your head around, because it both seems a little bit defying logic. On the other hand, it works exactly the way you would want it to work, which is wonderful. So again, you have, let me put these 2 pages side by side. So you now see the totality of UI source code that's representing it, minus the layout and things like that, but you're seeing the UI source code for both of these. So we have a little bit of HTML with some native elements, and they're completely shared. And yeah, so I want to show one more thing, and then it might make sense to then go through a few questions here. So that's a pretty simple application. We have a slightly more complicated application that I'm going to run on another platform. Where is that starter project? Right there. So this is a little kind of fake email client kind of thing. It's not showing any actual email or anything. It's all simulated. If this is going to compile. Okay, there we go. So this is all, we're going to make this public sometime next month, hopefully early next month. So there's a little bug in this application. I have to kind of close and open that. So you can imagine this is a little email client. And just like any email client, you have a list of folders, then you have a list of emails, and you can click on an email and then see the details of the email, and go back, click on another email, and so forth. So it's exactly what you'd expect from some kind of email-based application. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is actually based on Hayes email client. I think it looks exactly the same. Maybe not quite, and I'm not signed up for it, so I don't actually know. Yeah. So how is this built? Well, I'll give a little bit of a hint, because one thing that you can kind of do sometimes to see if something is web-based UI is you can try to kind of select the text. It's like, okay, that's probably not pure native UI, because I can select text on there, and then maybe here I can select some text. But then one other test you can do is, I don't know, it's hard to see what I'm doing, but I can't select across them. Why is that? Well, we actually have here is native mobile Blazor bindings based on Xamarin Forms UI for kind of the frame and the navigation. So for example, this menu button here and this navigation. This is native navigation using Xamarin Forms. And then we have one hybrid portion over here for this menu on the left, and then a second hybrid web view over here for hosting web-based Blazor here. So when I click on an email, this is one, you can think of it as one control, and then we have one here for the menu for other controls. You can embed multiple ones of these as well, and they can all share state. It's all .NET code that all kind of talks to each other, and using all the same Blazor features you always want. So you have your @injects to share the counter state object that keeps track of the current count, and wherever you want to use that from, whether you're using it on your native UI or your web-based UI, works all together. Actually, one last thing I want to show, actually back to, I think it was back to this one. So this was the kind of default project template. Just make sure that that still compiles. Okay, yeah. This one here shows how I can fetch some data. It's actually not going to a web service, it's just local data. But I want to show a really neat thing. So this is HTML-based UI here at the bottom. Let's go take a look at that UI. So this is here, not shared, this is in fetch data. It shows some weather forecasts that they're all just loaded from this static JSON file. But instead of the date, I want to show location. So let's say Boston, Massachusetts is my hometown, originally born and raised. John, where are you?
I'm in San Diego.
San Diego, California.
Yep.
And I'm just going to change some of these to say location so that I can change the JSON around. We don't actually need any more location. Okay, so now in fetch data, instead of showing the date, I'm going to show the location. And this is going to be location. And here where it deserializes it, it's going to be a string location. So if I just run this again, just to check that I did it right, instead of showing arbitrary dates, it'll show some locations. I'm so glad it doesn't show my password for my Mac, which actually might be helpful because I don't remember what my password is. I use my Apple Watch or fingerprint to log in.
I use Touch ID.
Yeah, exactly. So now when I go fetch data, it should show locations. Okay, well that's neat, but that's not particularly interesting. What I can show here now is, let's say we want to integrate with some native functionality. So I can have a button here that says, oh, sorry, not up there. This can be a button. And this is an HTML button. It's a regular, good old HTML button. It's going to show the location. But in the onClick, what I'm going to do is call go to forecast.location. So I got that right. And then I'm going to cheat, and I already wrote the code. I don't know. I think it was like 2 a.m. So I have this little method here. So remember, this is web-based UI, right? So this is HTML, and it's got an onClick, and it's calling a C# method.
Yep.
But in that C# method, now I'm going to Xamarin Essentials. So I'm using Xamarin Essentials geocoding API to convert that string, like San Diego or Boston or wherever, to convert that to a latitude and longitude. And then I use Xamarin Essentials again to call into the map API, which will do whatever the native map is on your given platform. And fingers crossed I actually did this right, because I rehearsed this only like one time because it was 2 a.m.
That's when the best code happens.
That's when something happens. Yeah, I don't know.
It's either best or worst.
Yeah, very relative. So now if I go to the forecasts here, fingers crossed, or we can just live debug this. So these are all buttons now. They're a little cut off here, but that's okay. But if I go to Boston, then it does nothing. What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong?
onClick.
Oh, I didn't do @onClick.
Oh.
That's why I wasn't auto-completing anything. Okay. Now Blazor is this beautiful thing. Like once it gets this like bold purple and you see like the
Yeah, then you know
yellow and
you're
everything,
good.
that's when it's like, now I'm really doing Blazor. Otherwise it's just uh-oh, John, your worst fear has come true.
What's that?
Please read Douglas's comment.
Douglas. Oh yeah. So there is a bit of a high
Yeah,
pitch noise. We couldn't seem to figure it out.
yeah, I can't hear it on my side. I take the blame for it, Douglas. I apologize. We tried fiddling with all two microphone settings. I tried a different microphone. I apologize. We could not figure out what's making this high pitch. I can't hear it, so I have a hard time debugging it. So I apologize for that. So now when I click on Boston, hey, look,
Oh, there you
Boston.
go.
Yeah. So this is from the web part of my UI. And if I go to San Diego, unless there's like some other San Diego, but I think, I don't know where you live, John, but San Diego, beautiful town.
There
Love
you
to go
go.
back sometime.
That's right. That's
Uh,
my house right there.
wow, right in
No, it's not my
downtown. Yeah,
house.
that's like that
Yeah.
shopping mall, farmer's market,
Right.
isn't it, right there?
They've actually
And then
closed
Lego.
that. Horton Plaza is now closed.
Oh,
Almost said.
yeah, it closed a while ago, didn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I guess I went long enough ago. It was still open. Whoops. I zoomed something. Anyway, so that's kind of showing just a little taste of what a hybrid application can do. You can use CSS on both sides. You can use HTML for parts where you want to use HTML. You can have some native UI wrapping around that. You have the full power of Xamarin Forms to use things like Xamarin Essentials and other Xamarin Forms components. It's this just beautiful combination of the best of all the worlds, where you get to use all the tech in a very rich and powerful way. And because it's Blazor on both sides of the of the frame, if you will,
Hmm.
you get to use your same skills, and it's all .NET code. So you get to use everything that you can use from .NET. You can use from either part of your application. It's what you built the UI part of your application in has no bearing on what powerful functionality is available to you. So like I used from this is an HTML button. I'm calling into a native map, native geocoding, and Xamarin Essentials has hundreds of APIs for doing getting
Right,
battery
right.
status,
Okay.
whatever it is you need to do, um, gyroscope, and you name it.
So that shows kind of the some of the value proposition and some of the developer advantage of I'm using HTML. I'm also able to use, like, if I've got existing CSS or HTML from other things, but I'm able to then call into native APIs. That is slick. Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. Let me see. There's some questions coming in here. So one question was about, let's see. One was saying they thought WebView was bad practice. But I guess, I mean, it all depends, right, on what you're trying to build, and it's a trade-off. I don't. So I wouldn't expect that there would really necessarily be any kind of performance impact, but I guess it depends on what you're building.
Yeah. So there's a few things that we're trying to achieve here. One is just for ourselves internally within Microsoft to kind of evaluate the prospects of this, but then by showing it here on the community stand-up with everybody who's watching right now or everybody who's watching in the future, and kind of starting a discussion around this, we think it's very interesting. We've heard from many customers that this is what they want, and when we get these bits public in July, hopefully early July, people can actually play around with it and really get a feel for it. What feels good? What would they like changed? And so forth. And until we can actually get people's hands on it, it's really hard to say for sure. We think it's promising. Otherwise, we wouldn't even put any effort into this.
Yeah.
This is Steve did almost all of the work for this. I did the Android port of this.
Oh, cool.
Steve did the rest of it. So credit to him for all of that. And getting into the hands of customers is the most important thing. And as far as to the specific question, is WebView a good practice or not a good practice, or does it have performance problems? Well, I could tell you that at least running on this iOS simulator, it's buttery smooth.
Huh.
It is you couldn't you couldn't tell the difference. I am having some weird problem with Android performance. I suspect why. I ran the profiler. It did not give me any hints, but I think I might know why it's happening. It's not specific to WebView, though. It's some other problem. On WPF that we saw, that kind of mail program that I showed, that's on WPF, buttery smooth. It's I don't think you could tell the difference between it. Now, these are very small applications, so obviously,
a lot of applications are relatively small, or you're only working with a specific amount of data per page. Like, you shouldn't have a page that has millions of elements or whatever, right? Normally.
Absolutely. And so like anything, is this necessarily the solution to every single problem out there? I don't think so. But if I think about, for example, my bank's mobile app for my iPhone, it's clearly some kind of hybrid application, because I can tell that the UI is kind of web. I can tell it's HTML elements, but with a little bit of native stuff around it for talking to the camera and things like that.
Right.
And it's not. I don't have that many bank accounts. I don't have that much money there.
Right.
I don't think how much money I have in there maybe affects the perf too much. So that would be cool. Like, oh, you have $10,000. It's fast. Oh, you'll have $500. It's slow. It wouldn't really make any sense. But from my experience so far, it's not too bad. I have heard of some growing pains in some other platforms that try to do similar things. And my hope is that these things, whatever problems we find, my hope is that we can just solve them. So far, it looks very promising, though, in terms of this tech. And a lot of apps are built this way. And so even if some of them might not have great perf, it is something that people are doing. And we'd love for you to be able to use Visual Studio and Blazor and C# and .NET to build these applications. If you're going to build it anyway, you might as well use these techs, because at least in my completely 100% biased experience, it's so much nicer to do it in C# and with Visual Studio and with setting breakpoints in the debugger. And I can do iOS development on my PC and Android and WPF. Oh my gosh, it's so nice.
Speaking of that, you're mentioning like developing for different things. How easy is it to share code and logic and services and things?
So sharing code between the two different parts within my application is completely trivial. That's what this sample, not this, well, this one does with the counter that I showed. And it can be any service. At that point, it's just .NET code calling other .NET code. That's the story there. As far as sharing code between the web portion of my native app and my regular Blazor web app, as in for the internet, I believe you can share things, because they're regular Blazor components. If you, let's say, package them up into some shared library and then reference it both from your ASP.NET Blazor web app and reference it from your the web Blazor portion of your hybrid application for mobile, I think it would just work. I haven't tried that. I can't think why it wouldn't work. Of course, there's a lot of things I can't think of. It doesn't mean that affects reality, unfortunately. But in theory, you should be able to share way more than ever before.
What about in terms of between, and I understand a lot of this is covered by like .NET Maui, but like for code that's specific to different iOS or whatever, I guess what I'm wondering is how do you set up your solution, and how much, because there was a question on that too, like how could things be included in this? How do you break apart what needs to be a separate project and what doesn't?
Yeah, if you've ever done any Xamarin Forms projects, including mobile Blazor bindings, which is based on the same tech, it has that exact same feel. So let me show on this application here what that looks like. So a typical application will have one shared UI project. So that'll be the one that kind of without a suffix, like my application. And then you have all these different platform-specific ones. So here we have an Android, an iOS, a macOS, and a Windows. These four projects are very, very, very small right now, because they, for the most part, all they do is say, load the shared UI. And then that does all the Xamarin Forms stuff, and it loads the web view for doing the web stuff. Like I could show it here. Like folders are mostly just empty, so references, things like that, asset catalogs. There's no assets in here. But obviously, when it comes time to publishing your app to an app store, you'll want the icons and setting up the permissions and things like that. Those are all device specific. And then there's only 2 C# files here that are very, very short, and they're just template code at this point anyway. So the app delegate that loads up the main page of the application, and then main.cs that just has this kind of one new line that's a little bit of a hack, and that's it. There's 2 lines of code here, neither of which is interesting.
Oh.
You might end up with more code in here. Like, so let's say on iOS you want to use Face ID or Apple Pay or some other, let's say for iOS 14, if you want to integrate with any of the new iOS 14 or whatever that thing is they announced this week.
Right.
Yeah, that would be iOS specific code, and that would go in here. And then if there's some Android specific thing you want to use, yeah, that would go in there, or Windows, Mac OS. But that's the stuff that would naturally be separate anyway. And then everything else goes in here, especially with the web UI, where the web UI is really not going to vary between the platforms. That's kind of the whole point of the web UI. But even the rest of your UI, because you're using Xamarin Forms components, sorry, not that one. That one. Stack layout, label button, they already render as needed on all the different platforms. So that all gets all your business logic, and by far most of your UI will be completely shared on all the different platforms.
Okay, then one more question as far as what you can share and stuff. So you've got your web view with a bootstrap CSS and stuff, and then you've also got your main mobile Blazor bindings CSS. It's got its own CSS file. Are you able to actually share, and how much can you use the same CSS between them?
Yeah. So can you share them? Yes, you can definitely share them. What would it look like to actually share them? Mm-hmm. That is a really good question. Can you share them, as in, can you share the contents and apply them? Yes. I kind of alluded to it briefly earlier. Their contents might need to be a little different. For example, for the web portion of my app, the app.css applies styles to things like HTML elements or anchor elements. Well, yeah, it'll apply to all the HTML and anchor elements in the native part of your application as well, except there aren't any, because the native parts of your app don't have any elements called HTML or A or app. Now, these these selectors that go based off of class name, like btn-primary, if you apply the same class in your HTML and in the native part of your application, yeah, you'll get, this is white, you'll get white foreground, and I don't know what color this is. How come I'm not getting a picker here? I should be getting a picker here.
Mostly blue.
Yeah, RGB, C2. Yeah. I don't know. But anyway, these things will work. Okay. There are some things that might, for example, this like flex stuff, I don't know if that works, aside from this element doesn't exist anyway, but obviously some things won't work. But you can share them, but as I was saying, there are cases where it might not make as much sense to do it because they are different. So it's kind of you have to judge that for yourself, and you might have to do things a little bit differently if you want to maximize your ability to share them.
Okay. And then let me see, question on where this specific thing you're showing off, would people watch for this in the existing mobile Blazor binding repo, or?
Yes, yeah. We're cleaning up some of the code. I've been working with Steve Sanderson on cleaning up some of the code and fixing a couple bugs, and we'll get that checked into the Xamarin/mobile Blazor bindings repo, the same mobile Blazor bindings repo. Related to that, what I do want to show, because I think, let me see, if I understood one of the questions about embedding it into XAML as well. Yes, so in this example here, it's being embedded using this Blazor web view, and then here's that the web component being embedded inside that. But this is all Blazor inside of Blazor. This other sample app here, and unless Steve objects, we'll have this same sample here. There's the outer part of the application is XAML, and then the inner part of the application is Razor. And so inside these pages here, it's using that same type of Blazor WebView component, but this is the XAML version of it. And then the mobile Blazor binding one wraps this and enables it to be used in Blazor. And so, yes, you could do this as well. You could have XAML, and regular Xamarin Forms XAML. So you have the code behind here. You can have your shared app state and things like that, and embed the Blazor web portion of the application inside XAML or inside more Blazor, which I think is bananas.
Yeah. How did you, so I missed the part before. When you navigate between areas, how are you passing, like for instance, I click on something in the left, I guess I'm using, that's navigating between two web views or web-based. So how do you actually select which navigates to which? How do you, like for instance, in the case of that mail client, when I click on a link on the left, how does it set the content on the right?
So the simplest way I can describe that is you would do it in the natural way you would do it regardless of what you were doing with Blazor. So if you forget about the fact that it's this weird hybrid thing.
Okay.
How would you do it if it was just all native or all mobile Blazor bindings native or all web-based native? Well, in Blazor, so let me run the application again just so everybody kind of has a feel for what we're talking about here. So aside from this weird bug where that menu doesn't show up, so I can't actually click on any of those, but when I click on an email, so in theory, if I clicked on this, it should show a different folder. It's not actually wired up to anything. So if I click on this, what would that actually do? Well, I would, I don't think we'll actually be able to do it because this app is a little too faked up to actually do too much meaningful stuff.
Okay.
But in general, I would go, because this is web UI. We saw it's kind of, you can see it's HTML. Yeah. I can select the text. So that's that's the folder list. So I would turn all of these into buttons, because right now they're not even actually links at all. They just kind of look like links. So button, and then I would do @onClick equals kind of the same thing I did before. So,
right. And then just to go to and
go to. Oh, that's okay. I didn't write that method net, so that's why it's not working. And then here I would have @code, and I would have private async task go to string folder name. Oops, folder name. And so it would be, this is kind of the start. And so I'll just try to rerun that just to see it. They didn't make a thing where if you rerun a Windows app, it kills it first. Otherwise, it's just like, can't, it just says like, can't overwrite exe file.
There is at least the thing where it stops prompting you with, or build failed. Do you want to run the last good build?
I saw that. That's a long time ago. So now these are all buttons, but of course, what would I do here? Well, what I might have here is I would have, actually I do have an app state here. I'm probably going to spend too much time coding this because.
But this is actually interesting, and some other people were like, yeah, that was my question too.
So. Oh, okay. Yeah, so here actually, very theoretically, we can do this. So my app state, my global app state object, it's not global per se, but it's going through dependency injection, and it's available to all pages on native UI and the web UI. And this has a current folder string. And so what I would do here is I would say app state current folder equals folder name. And actually, this is not actually async. So we'll just make that like that. So now it's setting. Oh, it's read only. Okay. Well, I can fix that. It's not read only anymore. Problem solved. All the world's problems are solved. Okay. So now we can set that. And okay, at this point, I don't think I'm going to write too much more of. But what this setter will probably need to do is raise some state has changed or equivalent type of thing, or maybe using cascading values, as you mentioned earlier. And one way or another, transmit that message using standard Blazor stuff that has nothing to do with web or native or anything. It's you're just doing Blazor. It's just that in part of it you're doing using HTML elements, and part of it you're using mobile Blazor binding elements. And over here, now that you've set the current folder and notified via mechanisms, what's going on, then this message list component, this guy, when it loads that same, this is that same
The
property.
folder. Yeah.
So this would need to be, essentially rerun or reinitialized
Yeah.
and say, the current folder is not inbox. It's actually, important messages or junk or sent items.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's how it loads it. It loads it from a JSON file with, from this amazingly efficient email storage mechanism.
Inbox.json. Yep.
Yeah.
Nice.
So you can imagine you'd have here other JSON files, or obviously you would go to some web service or through some caching layer and get that data. Cool. So there's really nothing specific to this here around it. It's regular.
I'm glad I asked that question, because that actually helps me think through how it's all kind of fit together and how to, you know what I mean?
And the funny thing is, because I'll be honest, I had to kind of wrap my head around this as well. The first time you see this, it's like you don't even know what you're looking at. And what I found is, don't think of it as two different applications. It's not, because it's not. It is one application. It's just like mixing XAML and Blazor, or Blazor native with Blazor web, all these different things. It's all running the same .NET code in the same process on the device. It's one application. It shares state. It's not doing it. It's not as crazy as it seems in terms of how you use it.
Okay.
The code is crazy, but
so the code is all these different kind of components, but at the end it's mashed together into one app. Basically, it's all running like you said.
Yeah, we saw from like the thing that helped me kind of like break that kind of mental block is where wherever it was that I did, where is it in fetch data, where from HTML I'm calling a C# method, which is that's not unusual in the Blazor world, but it's calling into Xamarin Essentials to open a map.
Yeah.
So but of course I can do that. Before I did it, I was like, wait, but is this gonna work? Because I'm like in a web page.
Yeah, right. But you're not.
But it's not though. It's running .NET code on the device. And of course, I can call any .NET method I want. I can make a web API call. I can open a map. I can, access whatever I need to do. Access the device's calendar, whatever I need to do.
Right.
It's there. It's
cool.
It's crazy.
Wow. Okay. So for people wanting to keep up with this, you've obviously you do the blog posts on the ASP.NET blog, and they can follow that. They can subscribe and follow to the repo. And then we'll get you back on when there's more updates as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you're following like the usual .NET suspects on Twitter or GitHub or the blog and things like that, you'd have to be hiding under a rock to kind of not hear about when we share this. In hopefully in a couple of weeks. There's a few bugs we have to work through, get some docs written up, get the project template set up, but the code is mostly already there. And you'll see it checked into the repo, hopefully even this week. It'll just won't be easy to use because we won't have project templates yet, but it'll be there.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we're at time for the week. We have tomorrow, we have the Entity Framework stand-up. They're moving to every other week now, which is pretty crazy. And then we also have coming up on Thursday, we have the Visual Studio .NET Community Stand-Up. So we're really, these community stand-ups are happening, 3 days this week. So that's exciting. And thanks a bunch, Eilon. This is amazing stuff. And I really want to play with this. And what you showed today, and these samples really helped me kind of conceptually understand it a lot more. So thank you.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thanks for everybody who's here.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it. We will, if you're watching on Twitch, we'll go raid somebody. And thanks for your time. And we'll catch you for the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up back next week.